going to call the meeting. Hi. I'm going to call the meeting to order and immediately change everything on the agenda. Okay. I thought we could do the except for citizen comments, if there are. Is there anything? Okay. So we'll just move everything so that we begin with working together on the climate action committees. But if you all would stay for, I mean, my people at the end, just so we can get rid of all those minutes that we haven't approved yet. We'll do that at the very end, and we'll do anything that we kind of didn't miss, that we missed. Is that, does that okay with everybody? Okay. So, boy, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. I think, you know, it's this, I think we have an opportunity in the North End to do some really interesting things. Working with Nina has been just fabulous. You are so lucky. Okay, help. Staff person, paid staff person. They make things happen.
We're a little slower.
Yeah. So let's just go around and do introductions and maybe say, if you're from Lake Forest Park, say one thing you like about Kenmore. And if you're from Kenmore, say one thing you like about Lake Forest Park. And I'll start. I'm gonna get the easy one. I like the hangar. I see, that's why you volunteer to go first. And I think it's you know, a great place to meet, and I've had many productive meetings there. And we went to the solar one. You did your presentation on solar there. So we'll go to
sure. Okay. Hi to those of you I don't know. I'm Nina Rasmussen. I'm the Climate Action Plan Program Manager for the City of Kenmore. I've been there about a year and a half now. And I also facilitate the Climate Action Advisory Committee. I really enjoy, I'm a big book person, so I really enjoy the library and third place books.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we go to Anne?
Hi, I'm Ann Udeloy, Vice Chair of Lake Forest Park's Climate Action Committee. And what I really like about Kenmore is your urban planning. You've got sidewalks, you're encouraging density in recognized areas, you're adding housing. Hopefully you'll also add low-income housing or additional forms of housing. But sidewalks, what a concept.
Brian, how about you?
Hello, I'm Brian Saunders. I'm also on the Climate Action Committee in Lake Forest Park. And mine's an easy one of what I like about Kenmore. You guys actually have brew pubs, and we do not have an actual brew pub here in Lake Forest Park. That's a crime, actually. We should probably be punished for that.
Well, Georgiana, we're going to put you on the spot. You can say something nice about either Kenmore or Lake Forest Park.
I'm relatively new to the area. I've been here for 2 years in Edmonds, and it just so happened that some friends of ours, we went out to lunch yesterday, and they were driving us around that area. So I saw Lake Forest Park for the first time yesterday, and I saw Kenmore for the first time yesterday, and I thought they were lovely. I really enjoyed it, and so we had a great afternoon. It was really lovely. And the weather was beautiful, chilly, but very clear. And what I like about Edmonds, since I can talk about that, I like the small town feel about it, and the views that are captured from every hill. And the hills are a good walk, so that's the benefit. But
welcome. So
thank you.
Is it Jack?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm Jack Jensen, Kenmore. One thing I like about Lake Forest Park is that I've been coming over here since my daughter was with to replace books. Now the bird store over here, so it's like I'm over here all the time, so. It's like we have businesses we don't have.
Okay. Dave,
Yeah, I'm Dave Stokes, I'm from the KENMORE Climate Committee. And I recently gave a presentation in Lake Forest Park, and in the process of doing that, did a lot of Google mapping. And was amazed to see the visible difference in tree canopy in Lake Forest Park versus surrounding areas. As a wildlife, myself, and as a climate, somebody who's interested in climate action, I really want to find out more about this tree canopy that you have and how that can be fostered and kept more, along with more dense development, that sort of thing. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but it's really noticeable and something worth looking at.
great. What presentation did you make?
I was presenting about urban wildlife. I've some research projects in the area.
At the Stewardship Foundation.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
So I'm Mariana from KENMORE as well. I really like Animal Acres March because I volunteer there as a master gardener, so I'm there almost every week. But also because there's the salmon viewing platform, and I love that space. It's just my favorite.
You ever seen salmon there?
No. Someday. Well, it will happen.
I'm Mark Hoffman. I'm the Community Development Director. For now, I'm the administrator of the COC until our senior planner is hired. I was going to say brew pubs, postdoc. I live in Redmond, and so postdoc is with their food truck is one of my favorites. But actually, and I've been here at Lake Forest Park a year, but I worked for various cities around the region, Bainbridge Island, Newcastle, Snoqualmie, and what really put KENMORE on the map was Debbie Bent. I've, all these years of being in meetings with her as a director and so forth, and that's what I identify with KENMORE.
Tamara Erickson. I'm on the Lake Forest Park Climate Action Committee. And my favorite part about KENMORE is my yoga studio, Lakeview Yoga. It's in KENMORE today, and it's awesome.
I'm Amy Bertram. I'm a member of Lake Forest Park Climate Action Committee, and I live in Lake Forest Park. And somebody tell me if St. Edward's Park is part of KENMORE. Yes, that is my favorite part. I spend much time wandering around on those trails.
So what we're saying is you're introducing yourself and are you from Kenmore?
Yes.
So you have to say something nice about Lake Forest. And you, Dana, the other way around.
Well, Nancy Hanson, I'm on the Climate Committee, Citizens Committee in Kenmore. And I first saw Lake Forest Park when the whole town center was empty. And I remember riding our bikes when 520 went through and we came through this area, and it was kind of the Burke Gilman Trail stopped right at Lake Forest Park. And then we had to go around on, I can't remember how we did that. And then see, I've had relatives here, lived here, and then a principal, well, he was a teacher in Kitsap County, and he'd come from Lake Forest Park and used to play soccer. I mean, yeah, with my nephews, and it's a whole long story, But the thing I admire most about Lake Forest Park right now is the safety that you've built in. You were the first ones to lower the speed limits, and the people are going along with it just fine because it's been there, established. And then you don't have the speed limit lower. Now KENMORE has tried to do that on the highway, but it's not really working too well. Tonight I was at 15 minutes at the light. People were in road rage coming on, from this point.
Yeah.
So anyway, I admire what you've done and how you have got it safe was the lights maybe? I don't know if you, that was all planned.
Oh, I'm
to
sure
get
it
across the
was.
street. But anyway, I admire that. I wish we could, coordinate something like that.
Dana, you're next. Yeah, you're last.
Thought that I was gonna go. So I'm Dana Campbell and I'm on the climate action committee with these funny people. And I love a lot of things about Kenmore. The first thing that jumps to mind is that amazing mural on the side of the Saint thing that's in the top. I think that's a really fun way to celebrate the whole community, and it's got great animals on there. And every time I pass it, I see something different and new that I hadn't noticed before. And it really is representative of all the things in Kenmore. And there's some great things. I love Swamp Creek. And I love the waterfront, that new park that's down there. It's just a lot of good stuff. And the new little town center area where they show movies in the summertime.
Well, I would like to say we are so lucky to have nice neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Could be worse, right? Could be better. So I thought what we do, and I have to say, we didn't, from our point of view, we really didn't plan exactly how we were gonna talk about what our climate action committee did and what your climate action committee did. Do you have somebody who's gonna talk a little bit, or should we just sort of raise the issue?
I did not designate anyone, no.
Okay, so the question is, what have you been doing? That's the question. So you're the climate action committee and you've been in existence a year and a half. I think we've been 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. We don't know. So the question is sort of what have you been doing?
Well, we're not quite a year, I guess I should say that, because we haven't gotten to where we need yet to go yet, but it's a careful plan that we're doing right now as far as what we're going to put our energy into, so.
Well, what is it, for you, what is that dream of that plan?
For me, gosh, I just want to coordinate with the committee, and I do dream of making sure that natural resources are incorporated in everything. First, I thought that might be separate, but to just make sure it's into every part of every climate plan.
I think we started off with this greenhouse gas study that was done, which sort of pointed us in the direction where the greatest effect might be had. So for instance, a large proportion of our greenhouse gases are associated with building infrastructure, heating and cooling, and that sort of thing. So the first thing we did was hold a seminar on heat pumps, and we had the benefit of a couple of.
Excuse me, point of personal privilege, Dave. If you point your voice towards the microphone on the screen, then the rest of us will also be able to hear. But right now, I'm really struggling to hear you.
Okay.
Are these microphones?
They're on, but they're
Okay,
not
These are
loud.
microphones.
yeah.
Oh,
But they-
I'm still struggling to hear you, so I appreciate, thank you.
Now,
Maybe that one's not working.
That's weird.
Can you hear him now, Ann?
can you hear me now?
I'm sorry, that's better. It's still, Sarah's voice is coming through very clearly and yours is not, and I don't understand but thank you for your, bringing the mic closer.
Yeah.
I don't think Dave's microphone is working, actually. I think the one on the right-hand side is working.
Is this better?
It's on.
He has a very soft voice.
Well,
it's a different timbre,
I-
the
yeah.
low.
Or someone else can talk. I'm not sure if this is working or not. So I guess I was saying, we have this greenhouse gas inventory study that we are working from. And that pointed us in the direction that we focused on, first activity was to hold a seminar on heat pumps. And we had a couple of engineers, one of whom is no longer with us, unfortunately. But I think Nita, you can know better than I, but they pretty much took the leadership role on that project.
Yeah, it was a committee led event. So we had a couple members who sort of on their own time separated from the group and worked on putting together materials, PowerPoint, that sort of thing. And so that helped alleviate some work off of staff. But I mean, it still required some time. We had to check everything for accuracy, sources, and clean up the PowerPoint, make it look a little more professional. But yeah, we want to like lean into those items that the committee can help with in order to expand our capacity. So while we are looking at like where the committee can provide that really good insight for our work plan and for work that staff may be considering or is already doing, we want to build on that and, you know, do more outreach and education, get out into the community, those sorts of things, connect with businesses or multifamily property owners, things like that. So I think what we're working on right now, what we have been for some time, is really figuring out like, okay, we have an idea of where our greenhouse gases our emissions are coming from. We have like we have our cap. We have a list of projects, you know, we've started to narrow things down based on feasibility and time constraints. So then with this narrow list, what makes sense to pursue in the short run, what makes sense to pursue in the long run, given staff capacity and given the capacity and expertise of the committee. And so I think that's a lot of what we've been working on, and it requires a lot of time just because there's a lot of information that needs to be shared. Sometimes it's just, you know, finding the flow of the group and just like, you know, we have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of things we want to bring to action. And so it can take some time for us to sort of narrow down on something and realize that if we're putting something on the back burner, that doesn't mean it's not important and we're not going to do it. But there are certain constraints that this committee has, and so we have to work within that and be realistic.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's kind of what we're contending with right now.
What do you have like planned for the near future?
Well, our next meeting is actually going to be sort of deciding that, I think, hopefully. But, you know, we've looked at, you know, some things that could be ongoing, like trying to encourage more bicycle usage and alternate modes of transportation. And so that can be done both from a committee and a city side. So pairing like our sidewalk projects with more education, things like that. Those are, you know, more, you can do a little bit here and there. But as far as like events, we've talked about tree giveaways or other forestry related events. We do have some pools of money in this next budget from leftover ARPA funds that will go towards like our special projects. So I think the committee will probably be a big piece in helping us determine what makes sense. Because even though we have that money, we don't necessarily have more staff. So trying to figure out how do we spend this money effectively, both in our urban forestry budget. We also have a small implementation budget for EV infrastructure. So I'm not sure how much the committee can do with that, but it might, you know, we're always trying to build partnerships with our commercial property owners, because obviously we can only impact what goes on, you know, public land and the right of way. So we know there's a need in commercial spaces as well. So perhaps more workshops. I'm trying to remember what else. We've talked about like life cycle assessments, trying to work that into our general process.
Building an energy policy.
Yeah, and building an energy policy, although I know King County is working potentially on that. I just had a meeting with them. They're working on potentially some regional model code. So
Like the K4C.
mhm,
Okay.
yeah, we just met right before this. So So yeah, there's a lot of different directions we could go. And we've been working the last few months to take each of these projects and figure out what would implementation look like, how much time would it take, who would take the lead, to start figuring out what is actually doable. And so I think in the next meeting next week and potentially into January, we'll be really putting that into like a timeline and putting some finer details on some things once we can figure out how much capacity we'll have.
Well, I'm gonna switch for just a second because I think we're already at the end where we want to talk about where we can work together. But I did want to say our committee did something a little different, and that was that we were charged with developing the climate action plan for the city. So we did a lot of work on that, and pulled it together, and it took us quite some time to sort of figure out what that was. And then we hired the same consultants you used on your plan to finalize it, and we do have a final product. And then, we had, 900 things to do, but one recommendation, which was to hire a climate action manager. We've been lobbying the council for that, using the model of KENMORE's financing for Nina's position, which was the solid waste franchise fee. The city council did put in a franchise fee, but don't have a manager yet. So there's a strategy in place to use some of the money from the franchise fee to pay off debt. We don't call it debt, what do we? Something deficit. And then just to save some of that money over this year, so that at the end of December, there would be enough money in a pot to hire a climate action manager. And that's a proviso in the budget. So for that to happen, there needs to be 4 votes on the council to actually do that implementation. It's in the budget it's in the budget as an intention, but that they will review the budget in a year from now and put that in place. So we finished that in May-ish. May. And then we sort of spent the next couple of months trying to figure out outreach, and we've done some of that. And I was hoping that Dana could talk a little bit about the climate hub, was something we're doing. And then we've also been working with the city received a grant to add the climate element to the comp plan, which I think you guys already have, right?
Yeah, we did it in this past year.
So the comp plan that's on the table now doesn't have that element in it, but we received a grant, and a couple of us from this committee are working with the climate action policy group to help shape the climate element. Maybe Anne or Mimi could talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to start with Dana.
Yes, so we are working on a project that's pretty fun. The idea is to have kind of a physical space where we have climate highlighted. So the kinds of projects that are going on around Lake Forest Park could have some kind of display there, indicate what they're doing. Or let me take a step back. So we've decided to have this climate hub, and the way we're making it is as a wall of the town center. So on the 2nd floor of Third Place Commons, there's a big wall behind the bookstore there that we have gotten permission from the corporate managers of the Third Place Center there to put a mural up on that wall, which is a backdrop actually for having large bulletin spaces where we can have revolving displays about the different kinds of climate things that are going on in Lake Forest Park. So this is very broad. It could be, you know, what the Stewardship Foundation has been doing for the last 3 months. And we think it would be like quarterly, these things would kind of revolve through. But we also have the tree board, and we have the climate action committee, and we have all sorts of little citizen groups that are doing very important jobs in Lake Forest Park that we just don't hear that much about. So the idea is to highlight all of those, maybe highlight a climate hero on a quarterly basis. So somebody in the area, doesn't have to be Lake Forest Park, in the area, who's doing great things that we want to draw attention to. We also want to have informational stuff up on that wall. So, you know, if there was some session that we had about heat pumps or battery power, for example, we could put information up for general citizenry to view as they go past that wall. And so it's kind of a way to grab people as they're in this public area, big public area, and make it a space where people know this is a place you can go to find out about climate, to learn things, and also a place to get information about getting in touch with other people who might be able to help you if you need help with resiliency of something, or just knowing what's going on in town, I guess is the main purpose behind this. So we have gotten we're starting to get more money, but we've got some money to get started on this wall. And the idea is to start with a mural painting that will involve the community, and then to put up bulletin boards, and we want to do a video monitor that can cycle through how much energy is this building using, or whatever, all these things that people just don't see or hear about or know in town. So it's a resource for everybody. Yeah, and and we have one other idea, and that is that there's these little sales kiosks that Merlone Geyer has up there. And so they have tentatively stated that we might be allowed to use one of those kiosks as a climate kiosk, in which we could keep all sorts of fun things for communicating or interacting with the public. So games or special posters or books. We've got a climate action book club. All sorts of things that could be in there, and then have hopefully high school students, but also volunteers from the neighborhood to go and open up the kiosk for an hour at a time, that we could advertise out there for people to come and explore these kinds of things with somebody who is engaged and interested in going. So we're excited about that too.
And we're using an artist from Kenmore to help us out.
That's
one from
great.
Kenmore and one from Lake Forest.
Yeah, we have Stacy Admin, and who we're talking to, and Debbie, forget her last name, who's owner of the Red Sky Gallery here. And both are stepping up to help us plan the mural, which is really fun.
And then it's gonna be a paint by numbers. So I've never done this, but they take a overhead projector, a gigantic one, and project it up there and do the outlines. And then an artist will tell you which color to paint. So
I can even do that.
yes, exactly. You have to stay in the lines, that's all. So, and we're hoping it'll be a big community event.
That sounds really cool.
Yes, well, that's another thing, is that actually, so I kind of developed this idea through the CATS programs. I don't know if you know of CATS, Dave, but like Climate Action Training School, which is held through Mid-Sound Fisheries, a little company that works on especially salmon waterways and stuff. But they train, it was about a class of 25 people who wanted to join the summer. So it was 3 months of some seminars online and then field trips on the project that you had to do. So this was the project that I had proposed. But my idea was also to have this hub idea be connecting cities so that our hub can communicate with your hub and Edmonds and Shoreline and, you know, share resources that way through these physical places that can attract people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of an analog person. I like physical places, but I'm wondering if do you have any
Online, you mean?
online aspect to it?
Well, so yeah, we're hoping to put in a video monitor there that would have revolving information about it.
I mean, that somebody could from home
Access the,
That's a bridge too far right now.
it could be something,
Yeah,
yeah, I guess. What we really want is like
Yeah, I
community,
get that.
yeah. But yes, it does need a website that would allow people to access it in that way too.
but what's interesting about it is it attracts the unusual suspects. You know, every Friday and Saturday night, people do swing dancing there. Well, maybe some of those couples will wander over in the break and we've seen we have a sample up there now that we did. And we put, people could say what they were interested in. They were interested in human composting and windows and doors. It was kind of strange. Those were the big ones. And they put dots on it. And then there hasn't been any lewd graffiti. But we encouraged them we asked them what we should name our salmon. That it's our mascot. And we got, I don't know what Jimmy is, but he got a lot of votes. So with it, and they, you know, so it's engaging and we put in our budget, we called it the youth thing. Somehow that we could engage young people, maybe pay them to come and do the kiosk or we were thinking, which is all up your bailiwick, a contest, you know, because engaging youth is problematic because they grow up and go away.
And they're busy.
And they're busy, yeah. And they used to have to do what we call a senior project here, where they had to do some community service, and that has changed significantly. So there's sort of after the pandemic, so that youth involvement. Have you struggled with youth involvement or?
Yes. We don't have much sort of connection with the schools.
They're fortresses these days.
Yeah,
They're very hard to get.
so like, you
Next
know,
year I'll have a student at Brookside and at Kellogg. So
Yay.
able to-
What
What school
doing, like-
district are you in?
Shoreline.
You're in Shoreline. Okay.
yeah, we're in North Shore. We've considered, you know, doing like youth climate ambassador programs or something. It's not something I've had time to do, but I just know there's something that we need to do.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you can get in the school system, at least like you can, you know, once those kids leave, you get a new batch of kids you can educate. But that first part is so hard.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know, currently mulling over how we might engage youth where we can, you know, get a good smattering of folks, either through the school system or as like some sort of extracurricular where they can get credit or something. Or, you know, maybe it's not involved with the schools at all right now. You know, maybe we start it as like a little offshoot thing and sort of grow it from there, but it's not, we've talked a bit about the need for engaging youth, but I don't know that we've gone into any like in-depth discussions as to, okay, what do we do about this?
We have two students on our committee who graduated a year ago, and those positions are vacant. So they were, you know, they're filled with incredible energy, so, but we have not been able to fill them. We've sent notes to, so, and we had some notion about a youth climate summit or something.
Somebody,
Tracy was talking about
yeah,
that. We've had this idea floating around where the kids would organize this summit about youth, but it just got to be a lot of work. We need somebody who has passion and access, I think. But Gracie's talked about one of our council members who was a liaison to.
the Innovation Lab School with the, I guess it's North Shore Schools, it's in the Canyon Park area, and I think they come mostly from Bothell, but it's all, they held something last spring with their climate group, and they have like 2 hours once a week to go to they're required to go to 2 different interest groups, and they work just with the students themselves. And I'm just totally impressed with their climate group. Yeah, just incredible work that they've done, and they put like a tabling and tents around the city hall in the spring, and it was well attended, and they even had Bill Gates' company for nuclear energy. Yeah.
Yes.
So it was a good show.
It is, they're engaging, and you just have to get them to us, right? Maybe that's a collaborative. I just want to do one quick thing more, which is this climate action, climate advisory group. Anne, do you want to just quickly talk about what we're doing there?
Sure, and please, you and Mimi should feel free to fill in any gaps I've left. So we've received, City of Lake Forest Park has received a grant through the Commerce Department to add this to our comprehensive plan. And there's a relatively snappy timeline. The work has to be completed in time for it to be incorporated by roughly the end of the year. And so a consultant's been hired, and the consultant's familiar with Lake Forest Park and the current comprehensive plan, which helps address some of the timeline issues. The work itself is tightly constrained by the requirements of the Commerce Grant. So it's not, here's some money, do what you want to do with it. It's, you must accomplish these specific goals within this time frame. Get going. And specific goals have been identified. We're working through what will happen and how it will happen. The first plan that's been provided in relatively strong detail is the engagement plan, which is the public outreach and the attempt to not only share what's going on with the broader community, but reach out for feedback and guidance from the community to ensure that there's some synergy, that all of this leads to an element in the comprehensive plan, which then informs our zoning and development going forward. And the better the community understands what's going on and why it's happening, and agrees to the process through participatory democracy, the stronger the outcomes will be. We can accomplish a lot if we're all pulling in the same direction. And on climate, we have a lot of people who are very concerned about climate and would be happy to pull in the same direction. But there's a fair amount of work that has to be done to explain why certain directions are being suggested and get community buy-in that those are indeed the directions people would like to go. And then have the community offer insights as to how we can get there, which is all a big part of the process. Eventually, the end point of the process is to have this codified in our municipal code. So the engagement plan has started off with the project launch, which is fourth quarter 2024. There will be first quarter 2025 identifying priorities. Second quarter is going to be refining those based on feedback. But there are a number of things that will be happening concurrently. And I'll hand it to our consultants. They are spinning up very swiftly because they have to go from 0 to 120 quite quickly. So they've been rolling out things like the engagement plan, where that has to start immediately, and they know the basic elements of it. Part of the engagement plan will be, for example, starting first quarter 2025, something that's been on our climate action committee wish list for a long time is having a component on the City of Lake Forest Park webpage that's easy to find, that guides people into effective climate action and climate resources. And the consultant's going to be helping with that, which is a tremendous boon. So there are going to be the standard open houses, public meetings. There's some discussion now about how to engage with communities that Lake Forest Park does not traditionally reach out to and pull in as a community. I'm going to point out that one difference between Kenmore and Edmonds and Lake Forest Park is both of your cities have relatively well-developed commercial cores. You have retail, you have some manufacturing, you have commercial business. We have town center and a number of home-based businesses. So when we're talking about reaching out to small business owners in Lake Forest Park, a lot of them are people like me who are working out of their house or have office space, probably outside of Lake Forest Park because there's no rental office space here. But relatively small businesses. But we don't specifically reach out to our business community explicitly as our small business community very often. Our multifamily housing community, another community that intentional outreach may be useful. And again, the grant will help with some of this.
And the more about climate, wherever we are, the better it is for these issues, right?
Absolutely. So then the next step of it that we're about to go on, that the consultants are going to lead on, is something that is extremely valuable for consultants to do, and that's a policy audit. So they're in the process of pulling together the relevant guiding documents for the City of Lake Forest Park, our municipal code, our climate action plan, our current comprehensive plan, et cetera, et cetera. We have our safe streets policies. We have a number of documents and guidance that have been developed over the year. And their goal is to identify all of these so that they can be listed and resourced. But also to pull together the guiding threads of them. What do we already have as policy or direction from the community that would guide in climate action planning? And that's the next phase that they're going to be ramping up. Additional to this, they're going to be doing some level of transportation study. That's a that's a must-have in this plan. And that will be developed at some point. Mark, do you know when they plan to run that out yet?
First quarter.
So that will be happening shortly. So it's an interesting process. I'm learning a lot by learning what's being done and how it's being done. And it adds, we all have a lot of homework in terms of reading through our existing documents and the municipal code in great detail so that we can comment effectively on all of these as we go forward.
Thank you, Ann. I'm gonna shift for just a minute and because I think that both of what we have in common is sort of talking about climate and the climate issues with our communities and doing some outreach. Is that, I mean, I'm hearing that. And my question would be, I think Kenmore and Lake Forest Park have had a good relationship, and it might be that we want to add Woodinville, Bothell, and Shoreline to any discussion that we have. And Edmonds, yes. Well, I think the big difference in our energy consumption is whether you're with Seattle City Light or Puget Sound Energy. Where was Seattle City Light? What?
Both, you have gas here.
Yes, all 71% of us have gas somewhere in our house, right? I guess I meant electricity. But, you know, we both have the same, Lake Forest Park and Shoreline both have the same garbage collection. And solid waste is an issue. So my question would be, I thought we could, this is the process I think we might be able to do, is just brainstorm. What are the kinds of things that we might be able to do collaboratively? Easy things, easy. I'm the easy person. No. Do things that are easy. And then sort of, once we look at that list, is there a way to sort of say which ones you think are the most important? And then we'll sort of go back to our groups and you meeting and sort of saying what's next. And so I know you have some things that are already on your list. But if we were going to do some outreach together or some program together, and we could pick a place, either one. And let me just say, we have a history of this. We did 3 presentations together. We did one on solar with Shoreline. With solar, we did induction cooking and heat pumps. So those were collaborative efforts among the 3, Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, and Kenmore, and each of us did one, but the advertising was collaborative. So that's sort of a model that I'm having in my mind. And they were relatively easy. Nina did all the publicity, so it's easy for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was good turnout too.
Yes. So, and the feedback we had a couple of people who went and from Lake Forest Park who came back and said they were gonna change the way they cooked and they were somebody was, they're incremental people. My observation is that people don't care about heat pump until their heat pump goes out, or their furnace goes out. So even if you did it last week.
Right, that's the importance of the
The
repetition.
repetition.
Gotta hit people when they're ready and it kind of comes in.
Yeah.
You hit different people every time.
Exactly. So what are the kinds of things that, just in a brainstorm mode, that you think we might be able to do together? I have one, and I'm gonna get started because it's the easy one, right? You go first, you get the answer. I think we should do something with Republic Services called, can you recycle this? And well, it's easy enough because you just ask them to come. And then it could be online and it could be in person and because there's a lot of buzz about recycling right now. No more glass recycling, I guess.
I agree.
And so it's an easy one.
Yeah.
So what else is easy?
I mean, I think for that too, also like a fact check, like my husband, whenever I put things in recycling, is like, oh, well, nothing ever actually gets recycled. And so I think it would be good to educate people about.
Can I write up here, Mark?
Oh, yeah, please.
Can I erase this?
Yeah, that is ancient.
What else?
One thing that Sarah and I had discussed too was like, one thing I think we could benefit from in Kenmore, and maybe this is the same in Lake Forest Park, is just standardized visuals of what you can recycle and compost on all like park trash cans, anything public facing. We don't have any of that. And I feel like that's an easy win to maybe use our collaborative efforts to see what makes sense as far as like, what do people look at and like actually retain and figure out how we can maybe encourage businesses to hop on board or something to that effect. I don't know what it would look like logistically, but I see that as like a need.
It seems like Republic Services should be engaged with that.
Yeah.
They would have the symbols or whatever it is.
And they do have like some giant stickers, like yay big. I don't know that they ever like give those out in bulk. I've seen them give like a few here and there at like Earth Day events and things like that.
But even if they
yeah.
gave like PDF document or something, we can
Yeah.
print out our own and put them on the receptacles that you're talking about. I guess what I find most complicated about that is that it never covers everything, so there's always something
Yeah.
that's not in a picture.
I know there's like apps, to like help you, like recycling guides and things like that. I don't know how expensive it would be to like go in for like a joint, something like that. But
Or just tell Republic they should just give it to us. They're franchisees, right? When's your contract up?
I don't know.
I
I don't manage that.
Okay. That's it.
The communication with them would be good.
Yes.
I want my calendar for the next year, so I don't put the wrong card out.
But yeah, I think it would be good to like at least have them come out, because they have a whole person doing community
Yeah.
outreach.
Yeah.
Is it Carla or somebody?
I think Carla oversees it, but
Okay.
I think,
Well,
I can't remember.
All right, well, we're jumping ahead to implementation before we finish the brainstorm. What are other things that would
I
be
mean, another
easy?
idea for that, I wonder if they do any kind of like field trips for kids. So at my kids' school, they went to Recology.
Yep.
And she did it like a year ago, and she still will like talk about it and other things. So I wonder if Republic does something like that.
Yeah, I think Cedar Grove does, I don't know if they do it for kids, but they do tours.
It's good for adults too.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been.
It's like field trip.
Good for
Yeah.
recycling.
And actually having maybe a field trip program where
Mhm.
we did field trips for people who would want to go to the wastewater plant or figure out, I don't know, there's all sorts of places.
Okay, where could we go on? What if we organize field trips? Where would they be besides for college? Besides.
Well,
Harvard?
there's the,
Whitewater.
Yeah,
Brightwater.
Brightwater.
Brightwater, yeah, they have a great tour.
What else? Who else? Where else? Would you, I mean, if what if we did it? Oh, Anne, just jump in, don't raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I want to shift the topic though off of waste management. So
Okay.
we can finish this first.
Okay, well, the field trips are supposed to be someplace maybe besides garbage. Oh, they're so much fun.
Well, we could take a field trip to the tool library.
Okay.
Or, I don't know,
A
there's
field trip to a forest, that's.
forest and get an.
You can come to the Milwaukee Forest. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the field trips is a little different from this, so this is one and this is one. Okay, Anne, what's yours?
Yeah, when we went through our climate planning for Lake Forest Park, the two sectors that generate the most greenhouse gases for us are our housing envelopes. So, you know, anything we can do to reduce the energy use to heat or cool a house is hugely important. And ironically, one of the shifts we're seeing as we move into heat pumps is the heat pumps require coolants that have higher greenhouse gas issues than we've had before. So we've got lots of compressors. So that's one area. The other area is transportation. And I'm wondering,
What is it, what would be the action item under this? Is it?
so that's why I'm saying the two items are housing and transportation. And I'm wondering if we can't do something straightforward collectively on transportation to identify how people can use transit, recreational corridors. An example would be, you know, how you can go from Lake Forest Park to take the Burke-Gilman Trail up to parks in Kenmore, and just start thinking of ourselves as a community where people can have recreational opportunities that move between communities without consuming carbon. And also look at, for example, we have a small local jitney service available if you're north of Ballinger. Haven't tried it yet, looking forward to trying that soon. But if it's working, then I can't imagine but what some parts of Kenmore would really benefit from it also.
Yeah.
Because there's a real issue with getting the first mile to transit. Especially a lot of people who would rather use transit, that first mile can be pretty rough in our cities that have no sidewalks.
But
In the
I
rain.
go back to housing again. She can't hear me, right? Anne, in the housing, what is it that you're talking about? Are you talking about
Okay.
insulation? Are you talking
In
about?
housing, I'm talking about, and this would be something that would be just a, as much as anything, community outreach, that housing is a big issue, and identifying resources to help people insulate their houses, which works in the summer and the winter. And also explaining the conversion to heat pumps, how this works, how effective they are. I'm absolutely somebody who learned about heat pumps and did nothing with the knowledge until my furnace went out. But when my furnace went out, I had the knowledge and replaced it with a heat pump.
Okay, yes.
That kind of process actually works quite well because furnaces are long-term investments, and it makes more sense to replace an aging furnace with a heat pump than the furnace you just installed. Conversion from natural gas again to electric. Also, as an area, I think we all experience the effects of the windstorm. It's going to be really hard to get people to give up natural gas if we don't have reliable electric service.
Okay, so maybe one of the others is
Batteries.
batteries. What do we got back?
I heard,
Generators, solar.
PSC is supposedly coming out with the battery pilot next month or so. I don't know what that looks like, but be very curious.
What else? Let me ask the Kenmore people, like we said, the Lake Forest people talk too much, so.
Oh,
I got it.
backing up to what Ann was talking about on housing. So I have a house that's built in 1960. There's absolutely no insulation in the upstairs walls, zero, and there's very little in the attic. So the attic was very visible. I fixed that, but tearing walls off is kind of a long-term project. I'm in the midst of that, but you know, it's like foundational things we do is like it's less and make our natural processes more resilient. So,
Mhm.
you know, what are we going to use less? And that can be weatherization. You know, there's a lot of people around, you know, particularly my neighbor, older, you know, they don't have the funds to do weatherization. It's like, what can we do to help those kind of people to,
Yeah.
and it helps us, so.
Okay.
Georgina has.
Oh, Georgina.
Yeah, all of this has been so fascinating. I've been writing a book, actually. So I'd have my head down. It's because I've been writing. There's been so much really good information here. Have you heard of the Whidbey Island Kicking Gas program? I know the Sierra Club has partnered with them, and the Sierra Club.
Gas.
Kicking gas, yeah, it's highly thought of. You might want to get a hold of the Sierra Club just to see if you could have them come and do a presentation with Whidbey Island. Whidbey Island and the Sierra Club received a huge grant, for this program because it had been successful. It was actually started by the youth on Whidbey Island, so that was pretty impressive. If you really can engage youth, I think they have great ideas. But that's worth a collaboration too, just to share ideas about how we can maximize the youth. This is their future, after all, that we're talking about. I do have experience with induction because I changed out a gas stove and put in induction, and we've just completed putting in a heat pump. It can be very expensive to start with, but you hope to save a lot of money as you go along. Also, the big benefit is that you can have air conditioning. And we are moving into a region that we aren't familiar with in the Pacific Northwest, that we're going to have very hot weather. Not maybe continuously, but we could easily, for instance, have two heat domes following each other. You know, what will we do? Now, at some point, we hope that the grid can handle that. But right now, I don't think a lot of people have AC that they'd be running in the summer. So that is a good selling point. It was a selling point for us. I know that. So I think we have some really great ideas here, and I do really want to take a lot of this information back to my group. It's the Edmonds Climate Advisory Board. We are a community group. We have a board of 8 members, and there's a lot that we're very interested in right now, which is to see Edmonds have a group like yours. We were calling it a climate commission to start with, but the name of it will be determined by the powers that be if they do agree to do this. We had a meeting with the mayor. He was impressed. So that's our vision. And that particular group would have subcommittees. We think you can get a lot done with subcommittees, and then they would be held accountable by the commission, or in your case, a committee. I'm really interested in learning more about the work you're doing on the Climate Policy Advisory Committee. That is probably following, I assume, Commerce's guidance, because they really hit that one. That we are very much interested in that. The more that is unfolding with you, the more I think we can all benefit from learning your experience of that. Since I know you're just starting out, but you certainly have the money now. You have, and we haven't applied for the Commerce money, but we are encouraging the city to do that. The city is becoming more open to grants because it's run into a budget problem. So our work is no money. We have to work with ideas for the city with no money that will advance the climate action plan. As you probably have found out, even though it's a lot of work to be developing a climate action plan, the hardest thing is implementing it. That is the hardest thing. We are doing an annual report just to lay out what the progress has been with our climate action plan since March of 2023. We discovered today Issaquah's climate dashboard. Are you familiar with that? I think that when we talk about education, I think it goes beyond events. Sometimes you're preaching to the choir with events, but if you can put the valuable information of how we are doing and what our challenges are to bring more people in to work with us, I think that will be very helpful in engaging the people in the community. If they know more about heat pumps and induction. I know that there was a group in Edmonds that actually had a grant for people to sign up for heat pumps, as an example, with like a whole neighborhood. Like, would you be interested in this? And then they could get a huge cut rate. Or solar. I think they were doing it for solar. There are a lot of things that you can look at for how you could save people money, perhaps, to get them more encouraged, because sometimes the first thing they say is it's too expensive, but it will save a lot of money. We're working a lot on cost benefit analysis now in order to appeal to the city for instance, having a climate commission. So I've probably talked longer than I should, but these are just a few ideas that I've been thinking of. I'm going to have to tune out pretty soon. But thank you for inviting me. And I would like to be able to have our group meet with you at some point. We're very interested in sharing. I think the more that communities can work together on climate, the better. I think the collaboration is vital. We are in Snohomish County, by the way, so I envy you that there's a lot of support for climate in King County. But so anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so I put down, I heard what Georgina said, and the woman who makes lists thought it was taking gas, induction stoves and heat pumps would be activities. Something about collaboration, a continued collaboration. And I know you're doing stuff with solar, right?
Yeah, we're doing another round of Solarize and, yeah, well, I mean, this past year, we opened it up to Lake Forest Park residents, and so we'll probably do the same. Obviously, I know you guys don't have like a full staff person to like manage, that, but we'd be open to, you know, doing the same and just maybe ask for promotion of it, you know.
I think promoting that would be awesome. 'Cause I found out about it kind of towards the end and
Yeah.
quite get it together.
And I think, you know, one thing we could do is, I asked one of our vendors what we could improve on. And he said, you know, definitely more workshops.
Yeah.
So maybe there's an opportunity to, you know, hold one in Lake Forest Park, hold one in Kenmore, and then do a virtual one as well. That way we're getting, you know, a few more folks engaged. And then, you know, we didn't record any sessions or one workshop this past year, so maybe doing that and providing it online as well to help answer questions. But I think it is important to help sort of like dispel some of the myth around it. People get really in their own heads about how complicated it is, and this is just an effort to uncomplicate it, really. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for extending the, you know, the ability of us in Lake Forest Park to be able to work with Solarize Kenmore. I took advantage of it. And they basically said, you know, they did the analysis and they said, no, it won't work for your property.
Yeah, we ran into that a lot.
Yeah, 51% canopy cover kind of does that sometimes. So the
Yeah.
question is, and I failed to pursue this, and I'm wondering if you talked to them about neighborhood solar projects where combined with the idea of batteries, being able to have something that you could draw on, like for instance, when you have a power.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about like community solar where it'd be, you know, a large panel array on government property, like city property. And then the residents see the benefit of that, but we don't have anything lined up right now that we can use. And I'm not sure how that would work from like a collective property standpoint with like neighbors. I imagine that could get quite complicated. But it's something we're still keeping our eyes on because there's a huge desire for solar still. But yeah, I mean, so we had even gone back and forth about whether or not we wanted to do Solarize again because we had so many issues with tree coverage. But again, I think it's a matter of just like, there are a lot of people who just dropped out of the process who probably just weren't ready yet. And just that second round of engagement will probably help get them across the finish line. And so we'll see. If we don't get a lot, we'll just say, okay, well, we're moving on to greener pastures in our next work plan. And but you know, at least we'll have tried that. So yeah.
Do they have any way to have a smaller project on a house, like rather than having all your electricity be solar, if you don't have as much light? Could you have fewer solar panels?
Yeah, I just think the return on investment is probably not as great, so it probably doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, if you're kind of below 4 kilowatts, it starts getting iffy as to whether you'll ever pay off the system.
Why can't you have just piecemeal parts that cost?
You can, but and basically it's a small amount that goes into the grid. One of the challenges is that when they started the programs up, the energy production was actually subsidized. In other words, not only did you get to use the energy, but Seattle City Light paid for the energy. And that program has stopped, and it makes the payback a lot tougher. And a part of this is that natural gas is highly subsidized. So in terms of, and unfortunately, the one initiative that passed this year was the one that makes it impossible. Yeah, it will now be illegal for Puget Sound Energy. Well, it will be contrary to the initiative that passed for Puget Sound Energy to offer financial incentives for people to switch off of natural gas.
We're waiting to see what happens with
I thought it'd be
that.
Yeah, did
challenging.
you talk about the K4C update today? After
Yeah.
the bid?
Sounds like in the next 4 or 5 days, there will be a lawsuit filed, so.
Right, yeah.
That seems reasonable, but the way it was written, if it's implemented as written, it would be very challenging.
Yeah, it's so
Oh.
big.
And-
We're in a wait and see pattern.
Yep. So, yeah, I have, even walking through Lake Forest Park, I've seen people who simply had little panel sets in their backyard. And they were using them to power a battery system for an outbuilding. So there are many ways one can implement solar, but we have a full solar array on our house and it only provides a third of our electricity. That third is useful. But I don't think there are any houses in Lake Forest Park or any developments where solar power is the sole source. I don't think anybody's off grid. I'll put it that way.
Okay, I'm gonna be the hustle person here. Did you want to say something?
Yes, but it has nothing to do with solar.
Okay, we're done with solar. Solar is.
Yeah,
What do you
I
got?
think we could, both our cities could get the word out about resilience hubs and where to go in case of, heat events and windstorms and all those kind of things that are coming our way. I think we can collaborate there. We're just small.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, and like having like resilience, like kits, like at home that people could, make, having like a workshop, like here's what you can do to put this together, but.
Does everyone know about the workshop coming Saturday? Let's see if this shares properly. Saturday over at the Shoreline Fire Station. Specifically on this topic of resilience and
I feel like I should know now.
What?
I feel like I should know. It's got KENMORE's logo on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
so if you go to the City of Lake Forest Park calendar, this is up on the calendar and has the link that you can sign up on. I'm not sure you can take a photo of it from where you're sitting, but exactly, Tamara. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, Shoreline Fire Station. In the last blackout, where we tried to set up a charging station just for people if they needed it at City Hall, it was cold. It was not, as people said as they walked in, oh, it's not a warming center.
Okay, I'm gonna ask I want to ask two more questions. I want to ask which ones of these that we've listed up here are easy, and which ones do you think we should collaborate on? That's one question. And the second is, what are the next steps? So what are there, if you thought to yourself, the cities of Kenmore and Lake Forest Park, with perhaps an invitation to Shoreline and Bothell and Woodinville to do something collaboratively, what would it be? I'm gonna, yeah,
Well, one other thing for the board that we've talked about is a car show,
car show.
electric car show.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna read this aloud for the people who I put this up on a blackboard. So how old fashioned, but we said Republic Services and all the things that sort of go with that cluster of things. A set of field trips to things like Brightwater, the Tool Library, the Miyawaki Forest, housing, sort of the house envelope and renovation. I think that must be what windows and doors are at the Climate Hub.
Yeah.
Transportation, sort of how is it that we get people using public transportation, I think is the issue here. Batteries and solar generators, kicking gas from the Sierra Club, induction stoves, heat pumps, solarizing workshops, resiliency hubs, and car shows. Our notion about this car show was people who have electric vehicles are like crazy people, and they want to talk to you and they want to get you in their car. And we would invite them to someplace where we do a car show, where the show would be the people who have their own cars. Easy. Okay, let me ask, yes, Tracy, you have your.
Well, I was gonna say, related to the car shows, that Lake Forest Park just got a $75,000 grant from the DSC, or I forgot who we got it from.
Just this morning, I forgot the story.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so there's been this long dream of basically having a string of charges that are standardized between all the cities you just mentioned. Is that still a dream? Can we start working on that?
I mean, we're working on an EV infrastructure plan right now. I think King County has kind of looked at the idea of a regional plan. I don't see that happening soon, though. But yeah, I mean, 522 is such a huge corridor, it makes sense to have reliable charging available. Our like report with recommendations and everything will be done by April. And I think part of that will have like specific sites. I mean, basically what we've gotten from the community too is they want Tesla chargers. I'm like, okay, those are quite expensive, but they seem to be the most reliable. That, you know, people aren't coming to and they're broken and then they complain to the city about. But yeah, I think there's a way in there to figure out what makes sense, especially if you're traveling between cities.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back and ask the same question. What if we were gonna, if Lake Forest Park and Shoreline, Lake Forest Park and Kenmore were gonna collaborate on something that sort of raised these issues, what would you say is one that's easy and good to do?
Inviting Republic Services.
Okay, so this is easy. Okay, what else?
I'd say, the bicycle and recreation travel, but also more bicycle use under transportation for, you know, students. But I think safety would have to be added to the transportation issue because the highway is going to be a factor in all of that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Is that your priority?
So what is that? Is that like an event?
Yeah,
Or is
it
it more
could
just
be-
outreach and?
It could be any, you know, events where what I remember we used to do.
We could have a transportation fair where you connect bikes and EVs and other types of transportation, maybe Lime bikes.
Yes, why aren't we all in line bike?
My husband
Dean
tried
James
to
don't
rent
send them on
one
the
and they're
sidewalks.
not.
Because our roads aren't safe.
We dot bike system.
I think having some kind of a fair where we could discuss, yeah, there are some major biking clubs in the area. And we may be able to do something where we invite a biking club to bring information in and we just brainstorm, where would you like to see bike routes in this area? How could we improve interconnectivity? I think there's been a lot of talk about it in Lake Forest Park, probably also in Kenmore, but not together. And we haven't actually developed those routes yet.
Okay.
Other than Burke Gilman.
We have a repair shop, we have a bike club, we have a bike shop.
Yeah, invite them to the transit.
Invite them.
Yeah.
So I think the solarized workshops are easy, right? We just sign our names onto the Kenmore's activities.
Yeah.
Could be.
I think it's also to add to the transportation, like
Yeah.
invite King County Metro,
Yeah.
you know, on there, and they could talk about the Metro Flex, which I didn't know
Yeah.
about until my husband worked for King County Metro, and so he told me about it. I'm like, that's so awesome. I didn't even know this existed.
What is it?
So it's Metroplex, so it's essentially kind of like a lift. And they'll take you like to these different like transit
And
hubs,
it
like
costs
that
like
last mile.
$3, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it costs bigger of like a
Yes,
bus.
it's
Mhm.
awesome.
Yeah,
I take it to Mount Lake Terrace to take the bike trail.
Ah,
It's
that's
awesome.
There's also the transit vans,
For community van.
community van, yeah.
mhm.
But yeah, that sounds like a good like summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we organize that around summer and then we could actually have like, we're all going down to Seattle to do something. And we actually teach people how to use the system and go and get home and it's not as, or we all go to Edmonds. We don't have to go to Seattle.
Field trip.
Enter. Yeah,
Field trips,
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
joy of Linwood.
Yep. Do you think we need to do these inductions, heat pumps again?
I think that's a continuous education thing. And we may not do it every year, but every other year for certain.
Yeah, I think, similar to what we did last year with a 3-part series, it's
Yeah.
really easy to implement. And,
Mhm.
you bring in one other city and everyone promotes it and each city hosts it.
And it changes from year to year too, these things are.
So with Shoreline, Lake Forest Park and Kenmore, what would be the three? Are they the same induction stoves, heat pumps and solar?
I mean, it doesn't have to be, I mean, we could have Republic Services
Yeah.
as one of those, have, Solarize as another, although, Shoreline isn't doing Solarize.
But they're, yeah,
Yeah, and then.
It would have
either-
batteries and Republic Services.
Yeah, you could
Okay.
do, I mean, you could do a general like solar and battery backup,
okay, so it's
like informational session.
a 3-city info session. And, maybe if we talked with, I hope you can hear me, if we talk with Shoreline, they may have something on their list that they want to put into that. All right, I don't want to keep you here very long, but I do have to ask them, so now what? What are the next steps? If we said we wanted to do some collaboration, and maybe it sounds to me like there's a 3-city sessions, the transportation might be in the summer, it might link with this EV car show too, that might be something. Is that? What are the next steps?
I mean, not clear, an obvious one is we want to expand this, right? We want to include more cities.
I think for the 3-city info session, the next step would be gauging Shoreline's interest. And touching base with their staff, because this will have to, I'm sure, have some staff input, just as far as securing a space and everything. If we're gonna do a transit fair, I would, depending on where we hold it, I would assume there's also some staff time needed. So engaging either, taking it to Kenmore staff, our events team, or Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, you guys, like, who's gonna help oversee this to make sure everything runs smoothly and that, the proper logistics have been thought of and everything like that, because we want to make sure we're gonna put our stamps on it, so to speak. We want to make sure it's good.
So, okay, so who's interested in the transit fair? Is that a fair question to ask you? Is there anybody here who's interested? Tracy is,
I am.
Anne? Is anybody from Kenmore interested in the transit fair?
Yeah.
Being like first, Mary Ann,
And
okay,
Nancy too.
okay. Is there somebody who's, I'm interested in the 3-city session, is there somebody else who's interested in that?
I'd be interested in that.
Dana? Tracy, you raise your hand, you're gonna be everywhere, you're not teaching next semester.
Don't you have a full-time job and a
Yeah.
council position?
And I can help
Mostly-
where in both. That's the direction we want to go.
Okay, and how do we think about Republic Service? Did we think of that as
I
one?
have a contact, I just need to find, I can't remember, she always sends, like, helpful tips every month or whatever. I just can never remember her name, but she's like the outreach person.
Carla?
It's somebody underneath Carla. Carla oversees, I think, but,
Okay.
So would that be part of the 3-city?
Would it be, yeah, well, it wouldn't be 3-city because Shoreline is in college,
think about that.
it'd be a 2-city. I don't know, does Woodinville, anybody know who collects Bottles garbage?
Bothell is ecology.
How about Woodinville?
We don't get a lot of engagement.
Okay, how about just the two of us? I mean, it seems like that would be,
Yes, maybe that's outside of the 3-city.
That's true, but if we did the 2, we could do Solarize workshop and Republic
Oh.
Services.
yeah,
So that's relevant for both. Could do another, wait,
For 3 cities, the transit discussion could fit the 3 cities quite easily.
That's true.
Yeah.
Think about that third one.
Okay. So maybe you and I can have coffee again.
But yeah, so I think if we're gonna do a transit fair, the next thing would be like setting up a next steps meeting with all relevant parties and starting to plan, figure out a date, a location, and then what it looks like.
Mhm.
It should be somewhere accessible by transit.
Makes sense.
That's right. Hey,
Well, you know, the Shoreline Center is a lovely venue, but try getting there on a weekend.
yeah. Um, Well, I found this particularly helpful, but to hear what you guys are doing. And I think the notion of, I think, I forget who said it, but that notion that the more the cities in the north end talk about what they're doing, the more impact we're likely to have. And so I think this has been a valuable conversation. I always feel compelled to get people out in a relatively short period of time, so I'm rushing towards the end. But I think that if I heard the next steps were that we would, you're gonna find out who the contact is at Republic and see, just begin to have a conversation with them about what we could do. That Sarah, Dana, Tracy, and then you and I are gonna have a conversation about this 3-city, maybe online, and that transit fair. That we talked about sort of figuring out what the transit fair would look like. And I think we do have somebody who's interested in doing this EV fair in Lake Forest Park, putting them out. But we didn't have enough of a runway last year, so.
Yeah, so maybe that's part of it, but
Yeah.
we can discuss
Yeah.
later.
Sort of do a timeline and sort of, does this, I don't wanna put things in people's work plans without them saying this is something they'd like to do.
You know, I've had this hope that we could have some event where we could bring people together over the issue of how we're managing climate every couple of months. Say every 3 or 4 months, there's something that we can all come together and learn about or share about that gets more people engaged with how they can reduce carbon consumption in their own life. And whether it's by getting an EV or using transit more or insulating their attic or any of these things, the more we put the information out there, the more it's available to people, the more likely it is that people will take advantage and take initiative. So I just love the idea of having these workshops on a rotating basis, but something every few months. So that it's just there, it's in the background, it's a part of our communities, it's part of the rhythm in the background of all of our dances.
Because I think the resiliency hubs are also, critical pieces, but we never think of them until the smoke is coming in or the, whatever is that?
Yeah, I like Anne's idea that we have something that's consistent and putting it out in the public eye. I think that outreach is a big part of what we can do.
Yeah.
Presenting these ideas and getting people thinking about it. So.
Yeah, they come on one at a time, not in crowds, so you have to keep it out there all the time,
Like maybe like the insulation in the attic, like if people can get in and buy insulation for cheap, and then we could all, do that like one of the times, like smaller, like manageable kind of things.
Right. Well, that's what the solarized Kenmore did.
Yeah, it's a group purchase discount,
Yeah.
managed by a third party though, so
yeah.
makes it a little easier on us.
Are there other ones of those out there? Like induction stoves or whatever else?
Not sure. I mean, this organization does just solar. But there might be other, I think there's some east side cities that have been working with Spark Northwest for their energized programs. I don't know if they've had a great experience with that.
So here's a concept towards the induction stove type concept, not the heat pump or the solar panels, but the home appliance type thing. If we kind of spend summer months getting people thinking about their utilities, and then, you know, I'm a member of our community emergency response team. I got a great deal on my radio that I'll be using last Friday. This is a great time to get a 25% discount on all kinds of weird stuff that's normally not on sale. So I'm, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people don't buy because it's so expensive, but given a good discount, given their planning and organizing around it, we may be able to just guide people towards learning enough so that they know how to make their purchase timely.
Yeah, maybe that third, like maybe a third workshop idea is just really around, like emergency planning and resilience, and there could be a small, sort of take home kit or something. I'd have to look into what we could do, but,
The CERT team is actually would support that 100%. The CERT team would love to do that, and doing that before the winter storm season is incredibly timely.
That seems like a good idea.
I
Yes.
mean, the emergency management.
Yeah, it'd give us time to plan. We could get it very well organized. We could probably get some sort of a funding organized for it, and then have a good workshop on it for all of our communities.
That program is an award-winning program. It is excellent. It's amazing.
So targeting it towards early fall of 2025.
Is that little kit that you give out as swag, is that basically part of that, or is that separate?
Me?
To get more folks. You have a little emergency preparedness kit that's, you give out as swag.
I'm not sure. We might
No.
get those from Nemco. Because we don't do our own emergency management,
Yeah, it's
typically.
not. Definitely
Okay.
not. Yeah.
So,
I got it at a KENMORE event, so.
yeah, they come to a lot of our things.
Yes, I got my green jacket from the company.
Okay, well, so one of the things we're looking for freebies, huh?
Well, we're looking for ways to engage people.
Uh-huh.
And if people walk home with, you know, a good portable light,
And we have an outreach budget we can tap into, so that wouldn't be a huge concern if they're not too pricey.
We can look into that.
For attendees, yeah.
I think planning just makes all kinds of sense. Being ready to be relatively self-sufficient just in case there's a delay in being able to get a major, you know, our local response will be solid. Not sure what's going to happen with major federal agencies over time.
Okay. All right, so what I'm hearing is that the next step is that it sounds like Nina and I are gonna get together and sort of lay something out and then give it back to our separate groups, is that? And then we'll contact Shoreline and Woodinville and Kenmore and see if they wanna play with us. And, okay,
Tracy, I'll follow up with you on the transit fair.
That's good.
Anybody else want to hop in on that one?
yes, somebody is,
I will,
Marianne. And Nina.
yeah, make sure.
Thank you.
We have all
And I would
emails
like to
shared.
To Nancy.
And Nancy.
Yeah.
I will make sure I pass along
Thank you.
emails.
Okay,
Thank
Okay.
you.
all right, I. You've been a great guest. Next time we're coming to your house. Well, and next time, if you come again, we'll have cookies and coffee for you. I thought if we were coming in, name tags aren't enough. You gotta feed people when they come to your house, right? So apologies for no food, but I did wanna, it's very helpful to touch bases with other folks and see what they're doing. And it's also sparks our imagination in ways that we hadn't thought about. So, and I think that, you know, we put up this border between Kenmore and Shoreline, I think because of, Kenmore and Lake Forest Park because of the school districts boundaries. And I think we could take that boundary
In the
down.
legislative districts
And,
now.
well, now we're across
Well,
some of those.
wait till that's redistricting, we'll be back with you guys.
Yeah, yeah. So, I'm gonna ignore the minutes one more time and we'll do that.
Has not
We have
stopped.
8 months of minutes to manage. So we're not gonna do it tonight either.
Thank you.
So is one last call, if there's anything anybody wants to say?
Well, thank you. Was this all your idea? I mean, just.
No, I had coffee.
And you.
It was Sarah's brainchild, though.
Yeah, it was pretty.
It was, our teams thought it would be good to.
Didn't know exactly what it would look like. I thought it was a part of council meeting or something and.
Oh,
and
Sarah
to
just
be
cold
announced
called
and,
me
you know,
one
that was
time.
it, but-
It was like, hey, I don't know you, but I want to get together.
Yeah, right.
Well, she's our model for what a this is what a climate manager is.
That's why, yeah, let's
Exactly.
hire more.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay, so motion to adjourn? Okay, done.
Hey, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you, yes. And the climate committee, we're meeting again in January, January 7th is our meeting. I think.